All right. How are we doing? Great. Can everybody hear me in the online session? Can you actually hear us? And do you see the screen? Great. Okay. So, how was the Thanksgiving? Easy. All right. Great. I hope you all enjoyed spending time with your friends and families. Okay. So, I did release the final project before Thanksgiving, right? I'm assuming that you guys have started working on that. And I'm assuming that you are right now finalizing your home of one. If you haven't started that yet, you're really behind. So, given that that was the very first thing in the first, I think, week that I released, it's very unfortunate. So, that being said, we've got this week and next week to go. And then December 13th is going to be the exam day where you're supposed to hand over your project. Is there any questions? Yes.
Do we come in on the 13th, or is that just the due date? And after that,
You're more than welcome to come in if you need to. So that's what I wanted to say. For next week and the week after, I will be available. Okay. The next week, I would rather if we convert those classes to some sort of hands-on session for your projects. So, but given that I cannot share your projects with everyone, it's going to be one-on-one. So the whole day, if you've got an issue with your project, either you can do it on WebEx or we can do it in person. You set an appointment and come to my office or come to the WebEx appointment and we go through it. Okay, both Monday and Wednesday, it's going to be dedicated for the final project, but it's going to have 40% of your grades in it. Now, if there is also an issue, for example, with your tablet presentation, when is the deadline on that one?
Sunday, the 5th,
This coming Sunday?
this coming Sunday.
Oh, okay, so that will be 2 days for that one. All right. So yeah, we're going to spend that for the final project to go through things. If, for example, you're doing small zone work or you're having problem running code or anything, you can go step by step through it and figure it out. Okay. My advice is use that time. So wherever you are in your work, if you want to check something, let's book an appointment, let's take a look at it. There are around 20 of you. I think those 2 days should cover all of you. Yes.
On the homework for outline, the rubric, it didn't mention anything about writing reports for those first 2 visualizations.
There is no report for those. It's only the last one.
Just making sure. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
The last one is requires a report. Okay. Anything else? No? All right. So there are two more very interesting subjects to cover. Next session is going to be the one that's going to bring everything together with a very famous example. The whole lecture is going to be about the example of the Challenger shuttle that was blown up 21 seconds after the launch, and how data visualization could be prevented, and how NASA basically been able to strong arm the other company to force them to approve the launch the night before, even though they disapproved it. We're going to go through the details of that in next session. I've got two more slides for two more sessions ready, but I feel like so if we wanted to have classes next week, we could. But I think by spending it on your projects, which is gonna impact your grades, is gonna be a better time to spend. But it's up to you. If you guys rather to come to the class, I would be more than happy. That would be actually easier to rather than spending the whole day. Which one do you want? It's also open to the online thing. Tell me what do you rather to do for next week?
I go for time for the project.
You go for the time. How many of you think you rather to spend the time on the project? Everyone in here. What about in the online session? Seems like only one person in there. Okay, 2% want to go with projects, the rest doesn't. 3%. The rest doesn't have any opinion on this. Okay, so we're going to go with the project itself. I feel like it's going to help you much more. So that's that. Today we want to talk about data density and small multiples. This is again one of those topics that you are familiar with. We are going to cover the theoretical aspects of it. But before we get to it, this is a reminder for us to be careful out there, especially with this new variant just popped out. So try to cover your cough, wash your hands, stay home if you're sick, and try to prevent touching your eyes or nose or mouth, and try to stay healthy and safe. This slide is the reminder about that ACM student outreach. If you're interested, please send me an email. This other slide is about the studies that we are running together with Professor John, where we are looking for volunteers and participants who are 18-year-olds or older, and who have at least 6 months of experience with C and C++ program language. And we are interested to see how the brain reacts to different code snippets. And you're going to use electroencephalograph, which is EEG, and eye tracking, and multiple ultracameras to record brain waves and eye movements during the sessions. This is a 2-session study, and you would be receiving $45 for to compensate you for your time, and thank you for your participation. Some of you already expressed your interest. To those who did, the team is going to start contacting you and trying to make appointments for your first session this week. and your second session would be arranged after the first session is done in the lab. So if you still haven't received any email or communication, you would be receiving, you would start receiving emails and communications about the available dates and times very soon. And for those of you who are thinking about it, it would be really helpful to us if you consider to participate. All right. So today we want to talk about small multiples, and we want to talk a little bit about data densities. And let's take a look at what it is and what we are after here. So this image that you see in here is a drawing by Christian Huygens, where the inner ellipse traces Earth's yearly journey around the sun. The larger ellipse shows Saturn's orbit viewed from the heaven. So the outermost images basically shows Saturn as seen through telescope located on Earth. If you look at the whole thing, we have 22 Saturns in here at different locations in three space, and from the perspective of two different observers, which is superior small multiple design. At the heart of quantitative reasoning is a single question. And that question is compared to what? You always want to know if you've got a chart or something, if something is working well or not. We always want to have a base. We always want something to compare it. The small multiple designs, multivariate and data multiple, basically answer directly by visually enforcing comparison of changes, of the differences among objects or the scope of alternatives and so on. So for a wide range of problems in data presentation, small multiples are going to be the very best possible design solution that you can hope for. So the pictures of postage stamp size are basically indexed by category or label, sequence over time, like the frames of a movie, or ordered by a quantitative variable not used in the single image itself, is what you see in here. Information slices are positioned within the eye span so that the viewers make comparison within at one glance, and basically constancy of design would basically puts the emphasis on changing data and not changing the data frame. Another very unique example of it is this one. This is a small multiple that reveal at one glance a scope of alternatives, which is a range of options. So what we've got in here is varying signal lights on the ends of a train. And this is coming from a rule book for railroad employees. So in here, we are basically muting the repeated train outline, and what we've got is basically bringing forward the differentiation in the color scheme. So the way that the two colors or the three different colors are presented together is what the focus of your attention is going to be on, rather than looking at the train, which is exactly the same thing. Is that correct? Yes. So at first, when you look at it, the first or two trains might be interesting, and then after that, your eyes and your brain is starting to work on the colors rather than the train. The train does not come into your mind at all anymore, and that's the whole point of a small multiple. Okay. Now you can do some very sophisticated things with the small multiples, and this is one of those. So at the far right, these photographs capture pressure, direction, and the speed of the calligraphic brush as it draws a single comma character. Images are indexed by time and by dual camera angle. So by time, it's going to be from left to right. The dual camera angle is going to be from down, from the bottom to the top. So the columns are going to be time. The rows, sorry, the rows are going to be time. The columns are going to be the camera angle, showing the exact same thing. The paired series of photographs link the hand, the brush, and the character. And then that will be the top row. If you look at the second row, it basically shows the pressure and the bend of the brush tip and the consequent width of the line that is being drawn. The sequence has a magical quality, reflecting a remark of Gary Winogrand, who is the photographer of this sequence of images. He said that there is nothing as mysterious as a fact that is clearly described. But there are some other famous works in this genre, and one of them is the work by Roy Lichtenstein, who created the mural with blue brushstroke for the lobby of a building in New York. The large painting contains allusions to other works by Lichtenstein, as well as many quotations. And some of these quotations are in reference. But those quotations are basically coming from some other artists. So not everything in here is his own work. Some of them are basically drawings of somebody else's famous work that he put together in a sequence of images on a wall. So the whole thing together is one image, really, but you can look at them as separate individual images. So in a book that was trying to describe morale, Samuel Antupin, who was also responsible for the annotation, for the annotated voice from the hospital, he basically crafted this superb double-page spread linking 21 small images from various sources to the morale at Central. This design both isolate details and places, and then places it in the context. And I'm going to take a moment in here so you can take a good look and see what you see in here. The one would be on this one, and then it goes to, it doesn't have, I think 1 and 2 is this one. Then you start with 3 and goes in this direction. Sorry, 1 and 2 is in here. So I should have put these two together. So to start from here, it's in 2 page next to each other. goes up to here, up to 6, and then comes back in here and continues. But there are some very famous works, and this is one of them. So what you see in here are basically different sketches of the same thing. Some handcrafts on the rock, and then they brought different people, they showed it to different people, and then they asked them to be drawn from different perspectives. And the results is what you see on the screen. If you look at these closely, you would notice that they are quite different from each other, and at the same time, they are quite interesting and revealing. Now let's take a look at the original one, and we're going to come back to this again. This is the actual rock with its own drawings and all. So with the figures and the pictographs clipped into stone, the Dighton writing rock sits near the Taunton River in southeastern Massachusetts. So from 1680 onwards, some observers sketched the inscriptions with some divergent results. Same rock, different views. In the previous slide, we basically arrayed them together in a comparative small multiple, so that we can basically be able to compare what was written. But some of these uncertain drawings, when sent off to European scrolls, were then converted into far-reaching historical discoveries of a certain visit to the New World. So one researcher triumphantly established that the marks as Scythian, a distinguished Orientalist, detected the word basically Melek, which is a translation to king, on this rock, and the others thoroughly, and the others thought that they saw some Phoenician or runic scripts inside the drawings in here. A Scandinavian antiquary translated the drawings into an account of a pre-Columbian sojourn to America by a party of Thorfinn and Hopeful. Since the writing resembles the on the Indian God Rock, hundreds of miles southwest, so the writing on this rock basically resembles what can also be found on the Indian God Rock that was thousands of miles away, or hundreds of miles in the southwest of this. So that sort of logic places the Vikings far inland, deep into what is now the West Virginia and Hawaii. So all this scholarship of wishful thinking denies priority to the original Native American residents. And the local experts basically concluded that the marks are nothing but Algonquin. But all of this was basically discovered after something like this happened. So after multiple of these drawings being placed together and next to each other, and then they were investigated one by one. And through those investigations, separate boards and separate styles are basically emerged. And that gave a hint about what is the origin of this, and people being able to place different history in for this particular rock. So a focus small multiple in here shows the history of variations in the Gauss-like fields, enforcing comparison over time. And another famous example is, it's not an actual example of a small multiple, but it's very revealing. So this is coming from China. So during the last 1260 years in China, there were lots of poetry, and there were lots of poets, but it wasn't clear where did the poets flourish, and it's not clear how many poets there were. And there were discussion of if their birthplace was actually changed or not over the years. So what we've got in here is four maps based on an inherently imperfect historical record that addresses these very unique questions. And these four maps are separate maps coming from separate set of data. So here we go. We've got the first two in here, but here's the other two. So what it shows in here is the geographical distribution of poets. The grand total is 10,086 during 4 dynasties, with their birthplace shifting through centuries toward Southeast China and concentrating, as in the case for so much human activity, in a relatively very small area. Now, if you put them together, you can basically see effects in much better way. Again, the records are imperfect, but this is from 4 different dynasties, and it clearly shows the movements of the poets and poetry over time and how they are scattered. Now, here's another one. So we've got a map of distribution of templates of temples of Matsu, which is the most famous sea goddess of China, with a similar reputation for miracles. She receives prayers of fishermen and sailors during the stormy weather. And when the sea is as dark as ink, she provides a torch on the top of the mast to guide the small boats to safety. In recent times, the story goes into this story that one mother, who is an alleged descendant of the sea goddess, is going to left her child at the temple while going to work on the farm, and saying, "Sea goddess, please take heed." And Matsu's reaction to supervising a daycare facility was not recorded in the river, but anyhow, what we've got in here is, in this display, is growing from surprisingly incomplete data, marks the prefecture with temple honoring Matsu. But we are unable to make the long-awaited comparison between the geographical distribution of the sea goddess temple and the birthplaces of Tang, Song, Ming, and Qing poets, because the poets are stranded over on the 2 pages that we got before. So comparisons must be enforced within the scope of the ISM, which is a fundamental point occasionally forgotten in practice. So what was the point of all of this? Now, if you look at the previous slides, which represented the emergence and immigration of poet and poetry in different dynasties in China, we were not able to compare that with this particular graph. So if you wanted to be able to compare these graphs together, you needed to be able to break the graphs down to the same time slices and put them in pair with each other. Or we could have generated 4 maps based on the results in this particular slide and put them side by side by the previous maps in some small multiples. Sorry. So we could basically break this thing to 4 slices that would match the dynasties representing the other 4 maps. And then we could basically put them in some small multiples like that. And that would provide a comparison between where the temple of the sea goddess was in each dynasty and where the birthplace of poetry was in each dynasty. This is another interesting example. So the struggle between the maintenance of context and the enforcement of comparison is what we see in here in the 19th century topographical diagram. What we have here is a surveying length of the Bourd River. The chart in here is hanging them out in parallel, more or less, while still retaining the specifics of the place names and lakes and the river branches on them. So note the various sequence of lakes. Here they are basically linearly arranged together. And without such detail, this is just another decorated bar chart. Some sort of typographic sets, ocean rippling at top. So what we've got in here on the mountains are going to be less successful, which is because it's kind of too arbitrary in their relocation and too stylized, and they are basically lacking the nice local particulars of the type of information that you see on the river charts on the below. So the top part is somewhat fading in its purpose, but what we get with the bottom section is basically a very good representation of small multiples. A very modern example is this chart. So we've got a simultaneous 2-dimensional indexing of multiple image, flattened within flatland, significantly different display with little other complication in reading. So these neurometric maps record distribution of brain electrical activity, arraying data over a matrix of color image. And we've got a breakdown in here on the frequency bands down here. And then individual diagnosis from forming the rows in here. Let me erase this so you can actually read. The contour line depicts only the average differences, which are basically normalized using the z-scores. They are basically comparing the row group compared to the healthy reference group, and so do not basically show the overlap or extreme outlying values of all the individual members of each group. So we can have like 20, well, not 20, we actually have the numbers in here. So we've got 93 on the dementia, 20 participants in schizophrenia, 30 in alcoholism, 35 in bipolar, unipolar 69, and the normal people are 60. And we can see the average across them on each image with each frequency band. So graphically, this recursive design resembles the LA smart chart where maps were basically themselves spread on 2 dimensions, type of pollution at the time date. Now, in our example in here, the dark color surrounding each image generates a disruptive white strips. And the point in here is that the neuro image is a good example of small multiples in which we don't need to put pictures as layers on top of each other. Instead, we can basically put them in separate images next to each other. And we can easily now see the differences on different frequency bands between a person who is having a bipolar depression versus a person who has schizophrenia. And these two are clearly shown, and we can see a very strong difference on the beta frequency band, which is from memory 8 to 13 hertz. I forgot some of these frequency bands, and there is a very dominant difference. And there is dominant difference between schizophrenia and bipolar in the theta frequency band, with schizophrenia showing a superbly large brain activity, while the bipolar doesn't show that. Another example is this picture, which shows different insects. And they are matched with some base. So location can be signaled by nearly silent methods, as in this picture, where an implicit grid basically pairs each insect with its fly fishing simulation. And the limited focus colors here is more effective than a strong rainbow colors. And you're not going to go through the reasons of that, but that is a very nice contrast that would help us to basically compare each of these with one of the insects. We talk about the small multiples, but whenever you've got small multiples, we also have something called data density. So our eyes can basically make a remarkable number of distinctions within a small area. With the use of very lightweight lines, it's easy to locate 625 points in 1 square inch, or equivalent to 100 points in 1 square centimeter. Or basically, you can consider how an 80 by 80 grid over a square inch, about 30 by 30 over a square centimeter, divides the space. So with the help of considerable redundancies and context, our eyes make fine distinctions between this sort of information all the time. The measurement instruments used in engineering, architectural, and machine work are engraved with some scales of 20 centimeters to the 20 increments to the centimeters and 50 to the inches in this example. And so if you consider reading of this fine print, the types in the US statistical abstract is set at 12 inch per vertical inch, with each line running at about 23 characters per inch for a maximum density of 276 characters per square inch. So the actual density given the white space is, in this case, something like 185 characters per square inch or 28 per square centimeter, which is quite huge. Maps routinely present even finer detail. Cartographer writes that the resolving power of the eye enables it to differentiate to 0.1 millimeter where provoked to do so. And in fact, 0.1 millimeter is also considered the error for eye tracking systems. So when you want to do eye tracking, what happens is that whenever you've got an image or something that you show on the screen to your participants, then you need to know where exactly they're looking at. And in order to figure out where they're looking at, because the eye tracker will basically give you a gaze information. So it tells you that on this screen, on a screen of size of x by y, the location is x1, y1 at time point t1. Okay, so a single pixel. Now you have to figure out what that single pixel represents in the eye tracking study. So what that means is that if you've got a picture of, for example, two-person playing a ball, in a garden, for example, what you need is you need to figure out which one of these objects in the scene the eye tracking system is basically picking on, or sorry, the gaze information is basically reflecting on. So let's say if the gaze location is in here, what we do usually is that we go and manually mark this. The way that we mark it is in a sense that I'm going to go and mark a polygon that represents a boundary around the object of interest, all the object of interest. So in some of these huge studies, it's going to become a ridiculous thing to do, frame by frame on every video. But the way that we are going to do this is that we cannot go and say the exact location of this is here. So the boundaries of the head is going to be there. That's going to be false. So the way they do it is the exact 0.1 millimeter reference. So they say that the boundary of each shape on the screen for your eyes to be able to correctly look at it is going to be 0.1. So they put a 0.1 millimeter around this and manually create these boundaries. Now, later on when they want to analyze things, what they do is they look at the percentage of the time that the gaze location was within this boundary. And that would become as a measure of how much you're looking at the person. Okay? Now, you might ask yourself, why the hell do I need to know that? The answer is that you can convey a lot of information out of that. If this is a head, of a person sitting between the eye and the ear. In an eye tracking study, and this is from the side, but it can also be from the front, they basically create some boundaries. Like, for example, here, or here, for the eye region, for the mouth region, for the body region. But they can also break it down to the lower body region, for example, or they can be more specific. Now, in a study with autism, the percentage of the time that the kids are looking at the eye and the mouth and the face region is a marker for how social they are. And autism is a disease in which the kids lack social skills. So less they look at these regions, lower their social skills is. So that's how all of this comes together. But the point, your eye can basically get up to 0.1 millimeter in error. That's how far it can go. So that's the limits of how small the information you can show is going to be and how close things can be together. If they are if they're closer than 0.1 millimeter from each other, then you cannot distinguish them from each other. Make sense? Okay, that was a long explanation for something so simple. All right. So the question is, how many statistical graphics takes advantage of the ability of the eye to detect large amounts of information in some very small space, and how much information should graphics show actually? Now, we are going to begin by considering an empirical measure of graphical performance, which is the data density. So the numbers that go into a graphic can be organized into a data matrix of observation by variables, taking into account the size of graphic in relation to the amount of data displayed, would basically yield the data density. So the data density of a graphic is going to be equal to the number of entries in the data matrix divided by area of data graphic. So data matrices and data densities vary enormously in practice. At one extreme, this display, which was originally created in 5 colors, present the data matrix of 4 entries, the name and the numbers for the 2 bars on the right, and then the left bar is merely the total of the other 2. So that really doesn't have that much information. So the graph would basically cover 26.5 square inches, 171 square centimeters, resulting in the data density of 0.15 numbers per square inch, or 0.02 numbers per square centimeter, which is thin indeed. The other example that we've got in here from the GISA star sheet comes in at a light weight of 2.8 numbers per square inch, and a small data matrix of 32 entries. But then there are graphs like this one. This is, we already saw this from the New York weather history. And this is a reduced version, in fact. And what we've got is 181 numbers per square inch in here. And as you can see, there are still lots of information being presented over time in here. Now, an annual sunshine record reports about 1,000 numbers per square inch, or 160 per square centimeter. The visual metaphor corresponds appropriately to the data if the image is reversed, so that the light areas are going to be the times when the sun is going to be shining. Another example that we've already seen is here. So this map, which is 27 square inches by 175 or 175 square centimeters, basically shows the location and boundaries of 30,000 communes of France. It would require at least 240,000 numbers to recreate the data of the map. We've got 30,000 latitudes and 30,000 longitudes, and perhaps 6 numbers describing the shape of each commune. So as a result, the data density is nearly something like 9,000 numbers per square inch, or 1,400 numbers per square centimeter. The new map of the galaxies locate something like 2,275,228 encoded rectangles on a two-dimensional surface of 61 square inch, which is 390 square centimeter. So each rectangle in here represents three numbers, two by its location, one by its shading, which basically yield a data density of 110,000 numbers per square inch or 17,000 numbers per square centimeter. This is currently the record and a data representation. So the data table shows the data density and the size of data matrix for graphics sampled from scientific and news publications. At least 20 graphics from each publication are examined in here. And the table records an enormous diversity of graphical performance, both within and between publications. A few data-rich designs basically appear in nearly every publication. The opportunity is there, but it is rarely basically exploited by the scientists. The average published graphics is rather thin, based on about 50 numbers shown at the rate of 10 per square inch. Among the world's newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, the Times of the London, and Asahi publish some data-rich graphics. The data densities equal to those of the Journal of American Statistical Association. So most of the American papers and magazines, along with Pravda, publish basically less data per graphic than the major papers of other industrialized countries. Very few statistical graphics being able to achieve the information display rates that are found in the maps. Highly detailed maps portray something like 100,000 to 150,000 bits per square inch. For example, the average US Geography survey topographic quadrangle measuring 17 by 23 inch is estimated to contain something around 100 million bits of information, or about 250,000 per square inch of information. So maybe someday we can have a statistical graphics that would perform as successfully as maps in carrying information, but evidently these days we are doing very poorly on that one. And the current thinking in a statistical visualization is you provide very little so that you don't confuse you. That's how they are thinking about it for now. So when you look at some of these graphs, they are very minimalistic in terms of the amount of things that they show at the same time. Okay? So, how much time do we have?
About 15 minutes.
Really? Oh my God. You're out of time. It's been a while, so. So data graphics should basically often be based on larger rather than smaller data messages, and have a higher rather than low data density. More information is better than less information, especially when the marginal cost of handling and interpreting additional information are low, as they are for most graphics. The simple things belong in tables or in text. Graphics can give a sense of large and complex data sets that cannot be managed in any other way. If the graphic becomes overcrowded, although several thousand numbers represented may basically be just fine. So a variety of data reduction techniques like averaging, clustering, and smoothing can basically thin the numbers out before we go ahead with the plotting. Summary graphics can emerge from high information displays, but there is nowhere to go if we begin with very low information design. Data-rich designs give a context and credibility to a statistical evidence. Low information designs are suspect. You always ask yourself what is left out, what is hidden, and why are we shown so little? High density graphics helps us to compare parts of the data by displaying much information within the view of the eye. We look at one page at a time, and the more on the page, the more effective and comparative our eye can be. The principle then is maximize data density and the size of the data matrix within a reason. High information graphics must be designed with special care. As the volume of data increases, data measures must shrink, and the clutter of chart junk, non-data and the redundant data is even more costly than usual in data rich designs. So the way to increase data density other than by enlarging the data matrix is to reduce the area of a graph. The shrink principle has a wide application. Graphics can be shrunk way down. So many data graphics can be reduced into area to half their currently published size, with virtually no less in the legibility and information. For example, Merton's crisp and elegant line allows the display of 17 small scale graphics on a single page, along with extensive text. Repeated application of the shrink principle leads to a powerful and effective graphical design, which is the small multiple. The small multiples resembles the frames of a movie, a series of graphics showing the same combination of variables indexed by changes in another variable. 23 hours of Los Angeles air pollution are basically organized into this display based on the computer generation, a computer generated video game. So what we see here is the hourly average distribution of reactive hydrocarbon emission. The design remains constant through all the frames, so the attention is going to be devoted entirely to the shifts in the data rather than everything in the background. Okay, so if you consider everything that is repeated in here, the only thing that takes your attention is going to be the thing that is not being repeated. So all the background color, all the background layout, they are all repeated, so you don't care. As far as the time that you know that this is, for example, for LA, you really don't care about the rest of it, regardless of you are living in LA or not. It's not like you want to match your home with the focus of the red temperature stuff on the screen in the first glance. In the first glance, your attention is going to be on the way that in hourly basis things are changing. So these green small multiples show the distribution of occurrence of the cancer melanoma. The sites of 269 primary melanomas are recorded in here, along with the distribution between men and women. Note the data graphical arithmetic similar to that of the multi-window plot. The effects of sampling errors are shown in these plot distributions, each based on a sample of so random normal deviates. So these six distributions illustrate in here basically show the age composition of herring catches each year from 1908 to 1913. A tremendous number of herring were spawned in 1904, and that class began to dominate the 1908 catch as 4-year-olds, then the 1909 catches as 5-year-olds, and so on. This next design compares a complex set of data. What you see are the chromosomes of from left to right: man, chimpanzee, gorilla, and orangutan. The similarities between humans and the great apes are very noticeable in this particular graphic. Another one is in here. A visually similar small multiple, the consumer report frequency of repair records for automobiles built from 1976 to 1981. This is a particularly ingenious mix of table and graphics, portraying a complex set of comparison between manufacturers, types of cars, year, and trouble spots. So, in conclusion, the well-designed small multiples are inevitably comparative, definitely multivariate, shrunken, high-density graphics, usually based on a large data matrix, drawn almost entirely with data ink, efficient in interpretation, often narrative in content, showing shifts in the relationship between variables as the index, variable changes. And the small multiples reflect much of the theory of the data graphics, which is for non-data ink, less is more, and for data ink, less is more. Any questions? No questions? All right. We will meet on Wednesday. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.